good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and a huge welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer. So my name is Steve Beck. I'm the owner and moderator of our community, Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer. So if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to go to our Facebook community to join us. So there's over 2,800 engineers on there. So many fantastic people to talk to, get equipped with, and get engaged with. So our next guest is the absolutely fantastic Mr. Ryan Sutton. So Ryan has worked with 2 times Grammy winner for King Country. He's also worked with actor legend Joe Pesci as well. He's been trained by the infamous producer Bob Guardio. So also happens to be Ryan's uncle, and has worked with producer extraordinaire Ted T as well, which has worked with another one of my favorite personal bands, Mute Math, as well. So without further ado, Mr. Ryan Sutton. How you doing, Ryan?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm really good. How's things over your end?
Things are good here in Nashville. It's hot, but
yeah,
as you guys might say, it's bloody hot. But it's, it's a typical summer here. But no, things are good. How about you guys over in the UK?
Yeah, things are starting to get a little bit better, to be honest, because more people, due to obviously lockdown, we were locked down for about a year and a half or so, a long time. But people are now starting to go out to gigs. We had the, I suppose you call it soccer, but we had the football over here as well, with the European Cup, which was great. So it was great to see people like fill out stadiums again. But yeah, it's been good. It's just so glad to see the live scene as well. So more people go to gigs as well, which has been absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, super exciting times. But yeah, excited to talk to you as well and have a chat about your journey and what you've been doing as well. So really looking forward to it, man.
Awesome. I'm here for the ride.
Fantastic, brilliant. So like with our previous guests, so for those that have not tuned in before, so we've interviewed, actually, Ryan's our 31st guest, which has been absolutely mind-blowing. I've been so humbled and honored to talk to professionals like Ryan over the last few months. And so what we'll do, Ryan, so we'll start off with your journey, if that's cool with you. So let's start right at the beginning. So when you were a kid, what type of music did your parents get you into?
It was interesting. I grew up in Southern California, and as you mentioned in the intro, my uncle, he had a studio in Hollywood, and my first memory is actually at that studio with my aunt in the lounge playing ping pong. I think I was like 3 years old, 4 years old, something like that. But I always remember artists coming in, artists going out, that kind of thing. So I was always kind of aware what was going on. But in terms of my taste and the stuff I loved, because of Bob being in the Four Seasons, being a founding member of the Four Seasons, I really loved a lot of the older music. Anything, going back from the 40s on, really. And but I connected, interestingly, in a big way with 2. One of them was Motown, which even to this day still shapes a lot of how I produce music, mix music, how I just hear it. That, and interestingly enough, country music. And because I always I'm a big song person. I love great songs. And both of those genres, interestingly, had great songs as a thing that was always at the forefront. So, but I grew up listening to anything from obviously the Motown and the country stuff, to Billy Joel, to Alvin Lee, to Toto, to what are they called? Moody's Mood for Love. Not Moody's Mood for Love, excuse me. Moody Blues. Moody's Mood for Love.
Moody Blues. Yeah.
Old song. But Moody Blues, man, all kinds of stuff. And my mom did something really interesting when I was in, I guess, I don't know what they would call it in the UK. Here it's middle school, like 8th grade, somewhere in that range. my mom started buying me, and my parents started buying me CDs, not necessarily of music that I liked per se. I mean, I did, but that wasn't the purpose. It was, if you're going to go down this path, this is stuff that you need to know. And so that shaped a lot of the breadth of musical influence on me. And that was huge. Like I said, at that time it would have been CDs. But my CD collection really was anything from Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman big band, kind of stuff on one end, all the way over to Metallica Black Album and, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, and like everything in between. I just found that I could listen to I enjoyed listening to almost anything. I don't want to disparage certain kinds of music I don't enjoy, because I think that they're still valuable. They're just not ones that, not everything speaks to me equally. But I had a pretty broad sense of what I loved for a really long time.
Absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for that, Ryan. So
Rich, did I lose you?
Yeah, I think we're back again. Apologies about that. We are live after all. we'll edit that one out, Ryan. No problem.
Right.
So thank you so much for that, Ryan. So with the songs that you listened to as a kid, were there any particular songs or any particular bands that influenced you to play an instrument? And what was the first instrument that you picked up?
Man, what influenced me to play an instrument? At first, it's interesting. I didn't want to learn an instrument because I saw someone play it. Like a lot of guitar players, I'm 40, and, in my age, we wanted to play like Clapton, or we wanted to play like Hendrix, or, Jeff Beck, or, that kind of thing. I wanted to learn how to play music so I could play the songs I loved, and learning how to, I'm not a great singer, but be able to kind of play and sing, the songs. And so I picked up guitar. That was my first instrument. One of my aunts bought me, I think she said she got it at a garage sale.
Wow.
$6, something like that. Some old acoustic guitar that had terrible action. And I doubt I even knew how to change the strings when she gave it to me. But that kind of, graduated into learning on my own. My dad plays guitar as well, and he gave me a chord book from the 1950s that he learned on. And so I just kind of went through the book and taught myself, basically all the chord shapes, and figured it out from there. And then, but yeah, I mean, it was mainly driven by the fact I just want to learn how to play the songs I loved. And that graduated into, oh, well, this one has more piano. Maybe I'll go learn the piano. So I have a piano sitting right here. It's an upright of my mom's from the 1970s. And I just kind of figured out, oh, okay, if this is a C on guitar, and those are the notes of the C, okay, well, these are the same notes on piano. And so I just kind of, translated it around to various instruments. But again, it was always the songs. I just wanted to play the songs.
That's so incredible and really inspiring as well. So you're learning all those songs, you're learning those instruments. So what got you into composition? Was there any particular person that influenced you to be a songwriter? Was it a family member, or was it bands, or what influenced you to start writing songs of your own?
I would say a lot of it was Bob. He was a big influence in that way. But I also I loved songs so much, I wanted to try it. And, like any endeavor you take as a kid, it, generally speaking, is terrible at first. And some of that early stuff I wrote, my parents still have, and they trot it out when they want to embarrass me, or, whatever, so that's always fun. But fortunately, it wasn't enough of a deterrent to stop me from doing it. But that was the composition. Cause I love songs. I wanted to try my hand at it. And for a little while, I had kind of a pseudo publishing deal coming out of high school where I was doing a lot of writing. And but there's a certain being there at the inception of something that's a lot of fun. And it's just a different rush when you're like, holy crap, that's a great lyric, or that's a great chord progression or melody or whatever it is. That feeling was always, and still is to this day, a big driving force for me.
Yeah.
And it's also simultaneously the most frustrating because you got to plow through a lot to be able to get there oftentimes. But I have a certain stubborn tenacity with that I just keep fighting until I find it.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for that. So tell us as well, how did you get into studio work? So was it through Bob? Was it through him that you got into studio work? Is that who's your biggest inspiration, would you say, when you're doing your projects now?
Yeah, that started with him. Let me see if I can, 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
I always love to show people this. So when I was in, might have been a freshman or a sophomore in high school, I told Bob, I was up there up the road at their house, and I said I want to try some recording stuff because he has a studio, and at that point he had, tape machine and console and all that kind of stuff. This was in the mid 90s, and he handed me this. Now,
amazing.
This is I think it's a four track, might be a 6 channel. It's 6 channels. I always felt like it was 4 tracks. I don't know. Anyways, he handed me this thing with the power supply and a manual. And he said, I don't have time to do this for you and show you this, but you can read, go figure it out. And so I took it home and started. I had like a keyboard and, my guitar and all that kind of stuff. And I just started messing around with it. And I hit a point where I only had 1 track left, but I still had more ideas. And so if it's a 6 track, I had 5 laid down, and I still had more than 1 idea to go. And so I called him and I said, hey, what do I do? I have more ideas, but I only have 1 channel left. And he said, well, you have to ping pong the tracks. And I said, well, what's ping pong mean? And he said, well, that's where you take the first 5 and bounce them down to that 6th. And now you have 5 tracks open. Now you better like what you did on that 6th one, because you're going to start recording over all the old stuff.
Yeah.
And you're going to lose it. The minute that you start recording over it, you're going to lose it. So you better like what you have there. And that blew my mind. That absolutely blew my mind. And so oftentimes I'll hear stories about, records that were done where they only had like 4 tracks. Technically they had 4 tracks, but they did a mountain of ping ponging to make that stuff happen. And after that, I was hooked, absolutely hooked. And a couple of years later, I did some more stuff on that. And a couple of years later, I got I believe it was a Kai, had a 16 channel hard disk recorder. And I had a DAT machine at that time. And my DAT machine could also burn a CD. So it's like this, this whole thing to be able to get it to my car. That's always where I wanted to get it, was to my car at that point. So, but, and then having 16 channels was great because, and I had I had like a drum machine that I had to manually program. It wasn't like MIDI where I was dragging and dropping. I had to actually create the patterns and record it in real time into the machine and everything. But I got hooked. I was absolutely mesmerized by the possibilities that I could explore through that process. And I was able to then couple wanting to write songs and also be able to actually kind of, manifest them in a way.
Yeah.
And, either say, okay, that's terrible, or, okay, that's actually kind of cool. And so that was, I won't say I grew up in a or learned, it's not like I learned on an old MCI with an old Studer, and that wasn't my first foray into recording. That came later. But there was an element of things from learning on this guy down here, and even on the 16th track of Kai, where I had to develop a gut instinct for recording because I had to commit everything as I was going. It wasn't like I had infinite undo options or I have, a gazillion tracks where I can just go until my heart's content. And even to this day, I'm very much, let's get it right going in kind of person. So, at a tech level, it's let's get the right microphone, let's get the right preamp, let's get the right instrument, let's get the right amplifier, and I'm not a fix it in the mix guy at all. I'm not a purist, not to say that I wouldn't do something like that, but that's not how I want to start.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much for that, Ryan, because I know that when I've talked to our guests over the last few months, so many people, like similar to what you said, they said that when they're recording, they might use loads of outboard gear and some beautiful compressors and EQs. But then when it comes to actually mixing, because everything has gone through all these amazing outboard pieces and microphones and placements, and like you said, rather than actually fixing it in the mix, it's all good to go with the recorded audio and everything's all fine. So when you actually, so maybe let's explore your journey maybe a bit more in a minute, but when you're mixing, and I don't know if you're involved in any mastering as well, but are you in the box or do you have a hybrid setup? How do you tend to usually approach a mix once everything has been recorded?
So I don't master. That's a whole other brain. I'm convinced. It's a whole other part of the art of making records. Obviously you go back in history and it started out as something purely technical. I think originally they were called transfer engineers.
Yeah, in the 60s, I think. Yeah, 60s.
Even before that, when they were first, getting from tape to vinyl, and into a playable, something at home, a playable medium. But so I have a hybrid setup here at my place, and by the time, generally speaking, if I'm doing a record, there's an engineer that I've used if I'm at a different facility. There's a couple of studios here in town that I like to go to if I can. Blackbird Studios is one of them.
Nice.
Ocean Way is one of them. Tracking Room used to be one of them until the building sold. That was a sad one because that was one of the only other big tracking facilities here in town. But there's an engineer that I've used. His name is Steve Marcantonio.
Okay.
Side note, he might be one to interview because that dude's got some stories.
Really amazing.
Oh yeah. And he is Dan Huff's engineer. And so he is incredible. And the first time I worked with him, I said, Steve, I'm going to let you do your thing. I love the sound of the records and all that. I said, I just want to take home a record. I want to take something home that when I push up faders, is like getting me 80-85% of the way there. From a sonic standpoint, not necessarily from a take standpoint, because I do a lot of comping and all that kind of stuff, but from a sonic standpoint. And so I want to know in that moment what I'm going to take home. And so I said, don't be shy. Let's get this thing, let's take it as far as we can without completely backing me into a corner at the mix. And he's incredible at that. He's absolutely incredible at that. So for me, mixing those kinds of projects becomes less about figuring out what this is, because I've already made those decisions along the way. And it's more just don't screw it up. in a lot of ways, and maximize what's there, maximize the performances and and the sonics and all that. And so, I have outboard, I've got compressors, and I keep like pre's and EQs and compressors over here. And then over here is a lot of like modulation, reverbs, delays, all that kind of stuff. And then in the middle here, you can't really see it, but I've got some of the Avid S1 controllers, basically the new artist mix. And I'm still very tactile in that way, because I play a mix like an instrument. I learned on consoles, and so I like that aspect of just feeling it. I know that's kind of hippy dippy, but like feeling it, in terms of I want to feel something react to pushing up a fader or turning an EQ or whatever, that kind of thing. So for me, it's that, and in mastering, I've primarily used two mastering engineers in my entire career. One is Brad Blackwood, and he is at Euphonic Masters in Memphis. I mean, his discography is a mile long. He's a Grammy winner, and all the kind of standard stuff. In not that a Grammy is standard, but in terms of high level type project, he's up there. And the other one's Ted Jensen from Sterling. And I just like the fact that they tend to take the same approach, where it's, I don't want to change your mix, let's just maximize it, and see how far we can take it. And I don't send stems to mastering. I mean, in some ways I understand it at a conceptual level, but I will never send a stem, like multiple stems, to mastering. I'd rather figure that stuff out in the mix.
Really interesting. Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Ryan. It's really interesting that you say that, because I sometimes do stem, because I think I've mentioned to you before, I'm a mastering engineer, but sometimes I do get stems sent to me and do stem mastering. But like most mastering engineers, maybe, and I suppose it's like, there's a whole massive argument that I've seen on many forums. I'm sure you've seen it as well, about stem mastering as well. But I really enjoy getting a stereo file through and doing some linear mastering on there. And it's almost like, sometimes I like to give a master where it's almost like I've not been there, because I've always been told with mastering, as far as I've been taught, it's really about quality control. So, and going for the last, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the song, and really understanding what the song needs, just to kind of get it to that, certain commercial standpoint for the mix engineer and the artist. So it was quite crudely put, but I remember one of our guests actually said, just get, as a mastering engineer, says his favorite mastering engineer is just get the F out the way. So I think it was basically kind of just saying, honor the mix and let it be, and see what you can add. And if you don't need to add anything to it, then leave it alone and just let it be, and that's it. So that's his approach. But
there are the very first mastering engineer I used on a project I produced was a guy, funny enough, named Hank Williams, and he was a mainstay here in Nashville for years. And I did 2 records with him, and then I was going to have him master something, and I got an email from him saying that he retired. And I was super bummed, because he took a very similar mastering approach, where it was like, if the mix is good, I don't need to mess with it. Let's just get it up to level, and make sure from a track sequencing standpoint that, fade in, fade out, levels are all, good, and it can be transferred to any number of mediums, and that kind of thing. And so I literally panicked when he said he retired, but I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I just started, I think I hopped on maybe like All Music, and started seeing some pretty consistent names on records that I liked the sound of. And I just started reaching out to them. There's Adam Ian in Portland, Maine. He's up at Bob Ludwig's place. There's a guy here in Nashville, another big one. I'm blanking on his name. But I like working with Brad. I've worked with him for a long time, and he's a super nice guy, really easy to work with. And when you find that level of trust with someone, you tend to not want to move.
Yeah.
So you just, Ted's great. I've used him on stuff. Brad's great. I've used him on stuff. And when you can just trust that you know what you're going to get back is not, some master where the snare's gone, or, they did so much processing that it sounds like it's underwater, or, with mid-side or who knows, multi-band or whatever.
Yeah.
I want to get my mix back. I just want to get a better version of my mix.
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
Thing.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. So let's maybe go backwards a little bit. And so when you were in studio, so obviously you said that your uncle gave you that multi-track cassette deck, which absolutely blew your mind. And you were starting to learn about multi-tracking and how all that works. So what was it like, your first experience of actually in the mix, in a studio, doing it for yourself the first time? And can you remember what console it was that you first went onto, and what DAW it was that you used, and what type of gear you were using at that moment in time?
The first time I went into a studio to mix, it was on an SSL 4000E. It's on the black knob. And the first time I wasn't even on a DAW. This was straight off 24-track tape.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I had realized fairly early on was when you're looking at a console, take out the master section, forget that for a second. But when you're looking at a console, there really isn't a lot there in terms of, oh my gosh, there's, 1,000 knobs and buttons on this thing. What am I going to do, right? If you learn one of them and what one of them can do, all the possibilities, the routing and all that kind of stuff. If you learn what one of them can do, the entire rest of the console makes complete sense, because all it is just a duplicate.
Yeah.
Master section's a little bit different, because that's where, depending on the desk, certain summing things come back, and, bus masters and all that kind of stuff. Outboard stuff would have been pretty standard, kind of stuff. LA2As, 1176s, Pultecs, a lot of that. 480, Lexicon 480s. Trying to think of what else would have been. I mean, a lot of the studios here are really well equipped. And at that point, it was before a lot of the studios started shutting down. So you'd have engineers oftentimes that would have their own cartage that would just park at a studio for, for a month or whatever, if they were mixing a project. But it was, it's really exhilarating actually being with hardware. Because part of the fun of it's never quite knowing what it's going to do. Like, when I turn this knob, is it going to be crusty? Is it going to be, is it going to actually do something? Is it going to blow up? Especially with older gear, you don't know what's going to happen sometimes when you power it on. And I mean, I've got some vintage pieces here that, you got to kind of limp them along and hope they don't, just completely die. But we've got some good techs here in Nashville, and to keep that stuff going. But it's a little impractical at this point, at least for me, to budget in mixing at a studio. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. As much as I love it, as much as I kind of miss doing it, I've tried to recreate as much of that as I possibly can, here in my place, at my house. So, and I also don't have to commute. I can literally just walk 30 feet.
And then you're all good to go. Absolutely.
So that's nice.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. So, Ryan, let's maybe have a chat about some of the projects that you've worked on over the years as well. So I know a big one was for King and Country as well. So tell us about how you got involved with those guys and what was the process like. Because I understand that you play various instruments on the album as well as helping engineer it as well. So tell us about the journey of that album.
So I was involved in another project and met Ted T through that project, who was one of the two producers on the King and Country stuff. The other one is Seth. Oh man, I'm terrible with names. He's a big CCM producer, Seth. Anyway, so he and his engineer, Mike O'Connor, they do, kind of half the record, and then Ted, kind of did the other half of the record. And I got involved with that project because Ted knew that I engineered and I had a studio and mix and, and all that. And so he asked if I wanted to do some work with him. And I said, sure. And it started out with, some independent stuff he was working on. He was helping develop, some artists to try to pitch around to labels here in town. And he's so funny. He's one of the most creative people I've ever been around my whole life. And he has very creative hours. So the first time I worked with him, he said, hey, I need you to edit some stuff for me for this record. And it was about 11:30 at night.
Wow.
And I had a 1-year-old at that point. And so I get sleep whenever you get sleep whenever you can, when you're that age. And, but because I wanted to work with him, I got up at 11:30 and I worked for about 3 hours and I got the guitars edited. He liked it. And so we just started doing more of that kind of remote type editing and comping, and I'd play on a few things here and there. And we started working on the For King and Country stuff, and it started out being a lot of the same. Hey, can you comp these vocals, or can you edit, clean up my comp, or whatever it might be, time align something. And then I started getting into doing some of the tracking on that, and at Ted's house. And Ted actually has a really cool setup. He has a pool house, and
oh, nice.
It's like a whole separate thing. But his living room is completely wired up, and so we would put drum kits in there, and we did string sessions in there, and it was funny. We'd mic it traditionally, but we'd put room mics like around the corner in the kitchen. And it had a really, really original sound. It was super cool to do. And Ted very much has the same approach of, we're going to commit the sound right now. And so, we just take he likes the sound of taking rooms and absolutely obliterating them with a distressor. And so, okay, that's the sound. We're going to go ahead and hit it. And so that was fun, because any project that you do that has high level talent all the way across the board, from the songwriting to the playing and singing, the producing, all the way through to the end, is always a blast. And those guys, when I did work with them, they are super nice guys. They're really friendly. They're really kind. They're very down to earth. They're very creative, and they were just a real pleasure, to work with. And they pushed one of the cool things that would happen is everyone pushed each other pretty hard insofar as the limits of what we could do. So Ted would push them vocally, maybe, or songwriting wise, and Ted would push me to just creativeness. And hey, he would say, hey, come up with something. I don't know quite what to do here. Let's do a different drum sound. Let's go try something. And it was just kind of a carte blanche kind of thing. And he was really cool with that. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I'm not going to say I always came up with brilliant ideas, because I didn't.
Yeah.
But some of them worked, some of them didn't. And so that was a very fun project. And all of that stuff then got sent to Ainsley Grozier to mix. He does all of Ted's stuff and the For King and Country stuff.
Mm.
And Ainsley that guy's a rock star with the mixing.
Yeah.
And, you know, funny enough, I would send him stuff all the time that we were working on, but I've never met him even. And so it's an interesting thing to, you know, we'd email a bunch, but not, you know, we never met in person. We never had occasion to meet in person. But anyways, yeah, it was a really fun time. It was a really creative time, and a lot of wacky hours doing that record.
Crazy. And also been a dad as well at the same time, man. That's just absolutely crazy.
That was a whole, man. Yeah. Having a young kid and learning how to balance that stuff all while, you know, being in the midst of a crazy intense project. And my wife works, and, you know, so there was a lot of plates being spun, and we're just trying to figure out how to not make them crash during that time.
Absolutely. So my other half, she's a midwife, but she said to me, it's like when I was starting all the mastering stuff, she went, just move into a commercial space, because our son just kept on walking. He's only 4 now, but he just kept on walking into the studio all the time. So eventually we had to put a lock on there, but she was just like, look, just move to the center of Manchester rather than him just keeping on wandering in, you know. So it's amazing though. It's like kind of how, especially during lockdown as well, I've noticed as well. I mean, looking at your studio, it looks phenomenal, but it's like how many people have actually moved into a home studio setup. And we were talking to, you may have come across him, a chap called Stephen Lipson, based over in the UK, who's friends with Hans Zimmer. So we had the absolute honor to interview him. And he goes to all sorts of commercial facilities, but he says he loves his home studio setup. He loves working in his home environment and being in that space, doing that music. So, you know, it's absolutely phenomenal that that people now that have got, like yourself, have got the technology to be able to give clients phenomenal sounds based in a home environment. Like you said, you know, you can nip downstairs, grab a coffee, and you're ready to rock and roll. It's just, it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It has its, I would say it has its pluses and minuses. You know, like everything in life, there are trade-offs, and there is a certain, I actually don't mind a commute because I can mentally either prepare myself for the day, or when I'm done with the day, have a bit of time to come home and then focus on my family. So I love that aspect of it, but from a convenience aspect, you can't beat a home setup. And you can get a really, really good way if you make sure, or you can go a really long way, I should say, if you make sure things like your acoustics are taken into account as best you can with the space that you have, and making sure that where you are is a place you want to be. So during lockdown, I actually redid this whole room in a lot of ways. All new flooring, all new paint colors, all new trim, all new acoustics, the whole thing. And because it was a great time because during lockdown, there were no projects happening. So I was like, well, I may as well, you know, give the studio a facelift. And it was the best decision I could have made, because while I enjoyed coming in and working each day in here before, I love it now. It's a great place to come in each day. And not that it doesn't have its quirks, not that, you know, like any place does. But it's the kind of space where I've done top 40 records, mixed top 40 records that have come out of this room, and no one knows, nor does anyone really care, you know, other than maybe.
Absolutely. Indeed, absolutely. So tell us about some of those top 40 records that you've enjoyed working on over the last few years.
I would say one of them that I was actually the most proud of was actually an independent record I produced for an artist named Alex Smith. And that was in 2000, I believe that was 2016. And he was almost graduated from college. We were introduced by a mutual friend of ours who I had produced a record for the year prior. And he really wanted to do an EP. And the artist I had worked with before said, well, here's mine. If you like it, he's a friend of mine. I can hook you up with, with him. And so we met, and really, really nice guy. And he came with some songs that some of them were good. Some of them weren't quite ready. And so we chose 6. And the thing that was really great about him is he was very open to having someone say, this song isn't there yet. He was actually really open to that, which I was quite impressed with. And so he had like phone, like iPhone recordings of, I don't know, maybe 20 songs. And we narrowed it down to the 6 that we used. And we had 2 weeks to do pre-production, which I'm big on pre-production, track it, and get all his vocals tracked in that 2-week period, because he had to go finish his last semester of college. And he didn't want to wait until the following year to finish it. And so I said, I'm good with that. I'll have a pretty strict timeline with our plan as to how to make that happen. We made it happen. And I spent, he went back, he was from Louisiana, and he went back to Louisiana. And then I just took the record from there and finished it. Other than he came back on fall break because we needed 2 songs that had gang vocals. And so he was in town anyways. And I said, well, let's just schedule it for that time. And that was the last thing we recorded on the record, was the gang vocals before I mixed. And around that time, I can't remember if it was after we were done with the record or slightly before, a family friend of ours going back a long time, her name's Terry Brown. We were having lunch and she said, hey, I'd love to hear, anything you're working on. And she's been in the industry for years, doing just about everything you can imagine. She's actually incredible at what she does. And she's a great person. So I sent it to her, and she started asking some questions. And, some events happened, and she ended up managing him for a while.
Oh, wow.
And so that's actually her texting me. So she ends up managing him, and because she has been in the industry for so long, she knows so many people at all the labels, all of the publishing companies, radio, promotions, like booking talent, like the whole thing. She's unreal. She ended up putting together a team that promoted one of the songs that they wanted to use as a single. It was called Loaded Up. And as an independent artist, they were able to work that record into the top 40, which is typically an extraordinarily expensive proposition to do. And I'm not saying this was cheap, but comparatively, this was all driven by Terry's knowledge and people that loved the song and wanted to work the song. And so I'm getting radio stations to play it. And so that was the first time I had done anything that had charted that high. And being able to see that process was really amazing. Looking at Billboard each week and saying, okay, where are we at? And it was a really eye-opening experience as to how records go up the charts, some of the dirty politics that can come into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We didn't play into any of that. We could have, we didn't. But it was an amazing thing to see that happen and to be a part of that. And I think we tracked the record at Blackbird with all A-list cats here in town. But everything else from there was done in this room, and aside from the mastering. And
Oh, wow.
I was proud of the fact that my 500 square feet, was able to put out a record that did that, and that could go toe to toe with bigger budget records that had, label money and publisher money and, the big engine behind it. And we didn't have that, but we were still able to do a lot. And a lot of people took notice of that. A lot of independent artists took notice of that. And that was, so, that's one that really stands out in my mind, just because it was unique in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks so much for that. That's absolutely amazing, Ryan. Just the fact as well that you can now do that with an independent artist as well, which is like super exciting. But how would you say as well, obviously from your experience in the industry for quite a number of years now, but how do artists, do you feel, how do they manage to be heard above the noise? So it must be so hard. I suppose we're living in a generation now where it's so easy to release your own music, create your own record label, publish yourself as well and get your music out there. But how do bands and artists get heard above the noise, do you feel?
It really boils down to, well, I'm not going to say there's not an element of luck, right?
Yeah.
There's timing.
Sure.
There's, you met the right person at the right time, at the right party or whatever. That is an element of it. I think one of the things that gets lost in the discussion is, yes, you can put your music out there. But when you have Spotify alone, so not Apple Music, not Tidal, not Pandora, not any of the other ones, just Spotify, I believe, is like 60,000 songs a day, I think is what I've heard, that are being uploaded. That is an enormous amount of material that
Absolutely.
I don't even know if I've heard 60,000 songs in my life, let alone a day. But so one of the things that, actually going back to Terry Brown, one of the things that she really drilled into me for a long, long time was, yes, you can release music, and then what? You have no plan. There is no coordinating entity in terms of marketing and the promotion and, hey, let's go do, a radio tour, or even like book a showcase, or releasing, even just like, there's no marketing plan like you would have if you were a business. You would project out, whatever, 6 months, a year, whatever, in advance what you're going to do. It seems to be that there is a certain lack in that planning happening with a lot of artists. And I'm not saying that you can't be discovered if you don't have that. A lot of artists don't have that. My encouragement is that they should go seek out those people who are able to do that, because they're going to be the ones that, if you have a really great product, they're going to be oftentimes that bridge to where other people are going to take notice, where they say, oh, okay, I saw this social media post, this single's being released and the video is being released like maybe a week later. And, oh, they're also doing a showcase here, and they've got some dates going here. But this was all stuff that was planned probably 3 months ago, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So that component of looking really far out is important, I think, for artists, and to find that person that will run with your project in that way, whether it's a manager or an agent or whatever. She puts it a really good way. Find your champion. Find the person that will be a giant megaphone for you as an artist and for your record, and just says, hey, pay attention to me. We've got something cool here. Maybe we can do something together. It doesn't always work, and she'd be the first one to tell you it doesn't always work. And all you can really do is put yourself in the best position with all of it to be noticed, to be discovered, to have a label, say, yes, let's sign you. And labels nowadays are looking more and more at people that have that stuff already together, to where it's more of a turnkey, oh, okay, they've already got this momentum. Let's just go ahead and bring them on, and run with it from there.
Amazing. That's great insight. Thanks so much for that, Ryan. Absolutely fantastic. Another burning question that I've got as well. If I'm right in saying, looking at All Music and your profile, have you worked with Joe Pesci? Am I right in saying that?
Pesci? Yeah.
Pesci, sorry, Pesci. Yeah. Joe Pesci. Yeah.
Yeah. That was wild. So that whole thing, it's so funny. That whole story actually starts in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Where Joe Pesci and my uncle grew up together. They were friends. And Joe, at first, was initially pursuing a music career. And then obviously he got into acting, and has obviously done tremendously well in that world. And he had done a record back in the 90s, I think, early 90s. It was sometime around like the My Cousin Vinny, when that movie came out, I think, somewhere around that time. But he wanted to do a record that was like a big band record. And so he hooked up with a producer named Jeff Gillette out in California. And he worked a lot with a group called the Yellow Jackets. And so they started working on an album independently. And, it was all kind of old standards from decades ago. And they did, let's see how, I'm trying to think of the events that this came in. They did a song that ended up being a mashup of 3 songs that Bob wrote, that my uncle wrote. And they turned it all into a song called Baby Girl. And they brought in a guy named Arturo Sandoval, who is a legendary Cuban band leader, trumpet player. I mean, legend, like Jeff Beck in guitars, Arturo Sandoval in this world. Brought him in to kind of do like an MC thing, play trumpet on it. And I think some of his band was on it too. And so they do this thing. And I think Arturo did the arrangements as well. They do the song, and Joe calls Bob and says, "Hey, we're doing this, but I'm not super happy with how it's turned out up until now. Would you mind taking a look at it and seeing if there's something you might do with it?" And initially, Bob said no. My aunt had some health problems at the time, and he just couldn't focus on that. Well, a year later, Joe called again and said, "Hey, yeah, would you like to do this now?" And Bob said, "Okay." So he calls me as I do all his engineering, and he said, "What do you need?" And he filled me in on the project, and I said, "Well, I need the Pro Tools session. I can't do anything without that. Maybe we start there." And so Jeff Gillette, the producer on the project, sent it to us and got me everything that we needed. And I took a day and just started going through the session and seeing what was there, the components of it, and all of that. And going back to something we said earlier, this record was recorded so well that it almost mixed itself. And it was really remarkable what Jeff had done. Jeff's an incredible engineer. Yeah. And so we get the song, and I'm listening to it, and I don't really know much about what's going on. And I'm at Bob's studio, and I start listening to the vocals, and it's Joe, and I'm like, there's another vocal on here, and I think I know who the voice is, but I wanted to go ask Bob. So I go out of the studio, walk down the hall, and I said, Bob, is that Adam Levine singing with Joe? Now, I don't know if Maroon 5 is big, obviously, in England. So Adam's the lead singer of Maroon 5. And he said, yeah, that's Adam. And I'm like, holy crap. All right. That's pretty friggin' cool. And I didn't know it was a trumpet at first. And I was like, there's this insanely high note going into the last chorus on the trumpet. And I'm like, who is that? And he said, that's Arturo Sandoval. And, my jaw hit the floor. So it's all this like crazy, crazy talent on the song. And the arrangement that they did. Yeah. And so Bob came in and we just kind of started chiseling away at it and seeing what elements we liked, elements we didn't. We ended up doing some more recording with some girls here in Nashville to do some background vocals, and that was, man, the singing talent in this town is it'll blow your friggin' mind. It's really remarkable. And so we did all of that, and I asked Bob, I said, can I mix this? Do you care if I'm the one that ends up mixing this? And he said, well, let's talk with Jeff Gillette, because he had mixed the rest of the record. And Jeff said, I'm handing this off to you guys now. He was really gracious about it. You guys do your thing, you mix it. So we did. And we did not send Joe anything for a while we were working on it. We just kind of hunkered down and said, okay, let's figure out something to do here. And we moved some stuff around and rearranged stuff and extended some sections and, and all that stuff. And so we get it mixed and send it to Joe, and Joe freaks out. He loves it. He's like, this is great. This is everything I wanted it to be. This is incredible. And so, okay, well, that's good. At least we're on the right track. And we didn't even know if it was going to make the record at that point, because there was talk about maybe if we couldn't figure it out, it just doesn't need to be on the album, because stylistically it's so different from the rest of the project. It's not a big band record. Our the thing we worked on, it's Cuban Latin, not pop Latin, that was big like in the late 90s. This is Latin. And so there's nothing like this on the rest of the album. And so the record, Joe, while he was in the middle of production on the record, he runs in to Adam Levine playing golf. So much happens on the golf course. If I can tell your audience, learn to play golf. I've been playing golf. I've been playing golf since I was 8 years old. And side note, that was actually going to be my first career path. I
heard about that. That's awesome.
So it will serve you in enumerated amounts of ways in the business world. And it's also just fun to do. So they run into each other, and Joe's telling him about this project. And Adam hears it. I think they go and sit in Joe's car, and they play him some of the rough mixes just as they're going through the project. And Adam asks him if he has a label for it, and he says no. And so Adam says, if I can do 2 duets, I'll put this out on my label. Adam has an imprint, kind of like a subsidiary under Sony. He said, I'll put this out on my imprint. I love this. So Adam does 2 duets on the record with him. One of them is My Sherry Amore, the old Stevie Wonder song, and this one, Baby Girl. So that's how Adam ends up on this. And so we get done with the mix and send it to Adam. Well, Maroon 5's on tour, and so we don't hear anything for probably, 2.5 months, something like that. And then it's about 2 weeks before Christmas, a few years ago, and I get an email from Bob's assistant that just says, see below. And I read it, and Adam is beyond thrilled with how it turned out. He loves it. He's like, this is awesome. So it winds up, okay, well, now it's on the record. Okay, it's been approved. It's on the album. We don't even know where it's going to be. We thought it would be the last track on the record, kind of like a bonus cut kind of thing. which is where it's at in the track sequence. I believe that's where it ended up. But it wound up being the first single, being the lead single off the record, and promoted by Sony to, out to radio and out to all of that stuff. And it was a little bit like the little song that could, the little engine that could. We had no idea. Yeah. It started out as something that Joe was like, I know it's here somewhere, we're just not finding it. To where Bob found it, and I'm working with Bob on this, and we find it, we track some more, and we get it mixed. And it is then winds up being kind of like one of the showcase pieces, on the project. And so that was just a trip, because the route that it took was so circuitous, and I've never come into a project doing production midway on something. So we were taking out these sections or muting these tracks, or just even segments of these tracks in the Pro Tools session, or flying stuff around, extending this and that, and then on someone else's production. And it felt a little strange at first, but I talked with Jeff Gillette, and he was like, it was about something completely different. And I happened to mention, I said, it's a little strange doing this. And he's like, I just want the best record that can happen. However we get there, that's what I want. Yeah. So if you guys chop this thing up and make it happen, hey, that's awesome. And so he was really great about that, and came out with something that wound up being a lot of fun. And I'll tell you a funny thing that happened. And it was an accident, but this is, it's an engineering thing, so this will make sense to the audience here. So
yeah, sure, absolutely.
Working with Melodyne, it basically freezes whatever you've melodyned. So you can move that region around and nothing changes. Melodyne basically says, this is where this exists, and nothing changes. Well, I had melodyned a portion of a vocal of Joe's, but we had shifted the arrangement a ton for this one thing to happen. And I had forgotten that I had melodyned this part with Joe. So we're playing through and we're listening, and this ad-lib part comes in a place it wasn't supposed to come into. But because we had shifted the whole arrangement and Melodyne still held his vocal there, it just played there. And it wound up being way cooler of a spot for that ad lib to be. And it's a key spot towards the end of the song that he does.
Yeah.
And Bob asked, he's like, what was that? Was that a track that we haven't heard yet? And I explained to him what happened. And we ended up going back and just putting it there, actually putting it there and committing that. But there are funny accidents that happen like that in productions that you don't expect if you are copying and pasting something and you paste it into the wrong location. Listen, because it might be way cooler than you think it's going to be. Yeah. Or that your original idea was. It might even be a better idea that you would have never done had you not made a mistake, if you will, in during the production. But anyway,
absolutely, it's just like it's a happy accident, though, isn't it? Really, that when that sort of thing happens. Yeah. So incredible. Thanks so much for that. That's absolutely fantastic. There was another one that I was going to. Couple more I was going to ask you about as well. So Frankie Valli as well. So I understand that Bob knows Frankie Valli as well, if that's right. He's worked with Frankie. So tell us about some of the stuff that you worked with Frankie and the project that you're on. Tis the Seasons, is that right? Is that
it was a Christmas album. And so Bob and Frankie were in a band. I mean, they were in the Four Seasons together. So they've known each other since they were, I think Bob may have been 19. Frankie's a few years older. And so they go back that far. And Bob had been writing songs and went to go see Frankie play. And this is pre Four Seasons. So they were a completely different band name. And they were a trio at this point. And Bob heard Frankie sing and he was like, that's the voice for my songs. this voice is undeniably good. It's different. It's got its own thing. It's really incredible. So Bob wrote or co-wrote just about all their hits. So anything from Sherry, Walk Like a Man, Big Girls Don't Cry, to Oh What a Night, Can't Take My Eyes Off You, Who Loves You Baby. They're just massive, massive hits. And so they have maintained a partnership, a business partnership, since the mid 60s, roughly, on a handshake. No contract, no nothing. It's a handshake.
Wow.
And I remember the first time he told me that, I said, oh, okay, well, that's cool. And he said, don't do what I've done, because what I did was incredibly risky, and it was a different time.
Yeah.
You know, it's 1960s New Jersey Italians. And so he said it was just a different thing. And anyway, so all of that, so they've maintained obviously that partnership since the 60s. And there was a desire that I believe came from Frankie's label to do a Christmas record. And so we wound up doing a Christmas record that was very different from most Christmas albums. Bob, so for your audience, there's also, if they're into Broadway, like theater, there's also the show Jersey Boys, which is about the Four Seasons. So a lot of what I'm saying about Bob is actually in that show. But
wow.
So Bob had done, the Four Seasons did a Christmas record back, I think, in the late 60s or mid 60s. And they did a Jersey Boys Christmas record in like 2011, I think. That was a little bit more traditional. It kind of blended a Four Seasons sound or a Jersey Boys type sound with Christmas music. This time around, Bob said, you know, I've already done these kind of records. You know, if we're going to do this, let's do something different. And so it's a very odd, not odd in a bad way. It's just odd that it's not a typical Christmas record where there's lots of sleigh bells everywhere. And it sounds like Bing Crosby, which is the Christmas music I love. I want Sinatra and Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole and all that. That's the stuff I love at Christmas. But so it was a very unorthodox record in that way, because we were always looking for arrangements that were not the typical way of working. And we brought in Bob's assistant, Deborah, who was also a session singer and singer for years. She sang with Loretta Lynn for years. And she brought in a friend of hers that I actually knew apart from them, a guy named Blair Masters. Blair is one of the top keys guys here in town, here in Nashville. He's actually one of Garth Brooks' keyboard players as well.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
So, and I was actually just working with Blair the other day on something else. But so Blair came in and brought his keyboard, and he has like a Logic setup. And the first week or two was really interesting because we had no idea what we were going to do. So we're just kind of like, you know, we've got some songs and what are we going to do? And so it just started with little experiments. And Bob's a great piano player as well. He played piano in the Four Seasons. And so, you know, he would just come up with ideas. And Bob is like, sometimes you just have to go with it because he's very creative as well. Kind of like Ted, super creative. It's like you just hold on as best you can because the ride you're about to go on can be intense and a lot of fun, but it can be intense. And so we just started kind of chiseling away at stuff until, oh, okay, this song had its little identity, and this song has its little identity, and it was a very unorthodox way of making a record, but it was a lot of fun because it was different. Not that it wouldn't have been fun if it was more traditional in its approach, but because it was very unorthodox in its approach, it just had a very, very unique thing. And I got to work with someone who was kind of one of my heroes on it. There's a song on there called "Merry Christmas, Baby." It's an old blues song, blues Christmas song, and I forget who did it first, but it's old.
Yeah.
And so Bob had the idea of maybe having like a guest guitar player come in and play on it. And so, he said, what do you, we were talking, and he said, well, who would you guys recommend? And he didn't quite say like an artist guitar player at first. And there's obviously some incredible guitar players here in Nashville. And so I started listing up several of the top session players here in town. And he said, yeah, I don't know if I want to go that route. They're great players. I know a lot of them, but I don't know if I want to go that route.
Yeah.
Well, it ended up that we got Jeff Beck to.
Wow.
And Jeff is one of my guitar heroes, even though my guitar style has nothing to do with how he plays and how I play. Yeah. But he has such a unique way of playing, and it's really, really incredible. And so I was like, well, hey, that's cool. But I know he lives in England, and we were talking about, them just flying, sending them stuff, and they would record it and just send us back tracks over, Dropbox, or, we transfer or whatever, and found out that he was actually on tour in the States. And he has an engineer in LA that he uses on, I guess, has used on a lot of his albums that he likes. And I was like, oh, he's in the States. It'd be kind of a bummer. I can't work with him. Okay, fine. I get it. But we found out that it was like 2 weeks from when we made the call to see if he wanted to do it, he was actually going to be in Nashville playing a show at a place called the Ascend Amphitheater downtown. And he wanted to do it here. He's like, Bob's here. He's producing the album. Let's just do it while we're here. And so we went to a studio here in Franklin. So I'm in a suburb of Nashville called Franklin. It's a great studio here in Franklin called Dark Horse. And so we went out to Dark Horse, and I had everything set up, ready to go for Jeff to come in. We only had him for about 2 hours, hour and 45 minutes or so, because he had to get to sound check up at the amphitheater. And so I made sure all my ducks were in a row, and we were able to knock it out. And Jeff did something really cool. He came in and was like, what are you hearing or whatever? And Bob said, I love what you do. Maybe do what you do. And Jeff said something very interesting. He said, I'll do what I do, but I want to serve the song. This isn't my record. I'm a feature on this one song, but this is Frankie's album. This isn't my album. So he's like, I could play, kind of anything, that you would want me to. And so I played the song a couple of times. Jeff got familiar with it, and he said, okay, let me go. And so we just did a bunch of takes on some stuff. I think 6 or 7 takes and a couple of punches on some things, and ended up that the way I recorded it was interesting. I had a 57, a Royer 121. Those were both on the grill cloth and Phaseline. And then I had a FET 47 about, 3 feet back. And then I had 2 Gefell, I forget what the letters are, UM90s, U90s or whatever. They're tube mics.
Yeah.
As room mics about 12 feet back. And because we didn't quite know what we were going to be after sonically, I wanted to cover my bases pretty broadly. And that all went through Neve gear, and no EQ, no nothing. Just, I think I used a high pass on some stuff, and recorded all 5 of those tracks. And I didn't mix that song on the album, but they went to great engineer in New Jersey named Pete Karam, who had also done the Jersey Boys soundtrack. He was the engineer and mixer on the soundtrack. And so Bob wanted him to mix this song for the record. And we're in mixing, and we're doing this all over Source Connect. So we're here in Nashville working on stuff. Pete's in New Jersey. And so we're, listening to Pete's Pro Tools session through Bob's speakers. He uses Barefoot speakers. And Bob he was like, this isn't how I remember this guitar sounding in the studio. It sounded incredible in the studio. What's going on? And so Pete said, well, this is what I've got going on with it. And Bob said, take it all off. Take it all off. And I want to hear it just as we sent it. So basically all faders at Unity, and the blend that I got with the inputs for that, you could have all the faders at Unity and have a guitar sound. And he said, that's what I want this to sound like, is that right there. So all the stuff that you put on, take it off. That's not to disparage Pete. Pete's unbelievable. But Pete wouldn't have necessarily known that that's what Bob was going to want from that guitar sound. And so Pete said, oh yeah, totally. I'll take all that stuff off. And oh yeah, that sounds great. Let's go from there. And Pete's great because he's not necessarily married to something. He might have an opinion one way or the other, but it's like, well, okay, it's not my album. Let's proceed forward.
Yeah,
so
sure.
that was really cool. Not only to record Jeff, he's the nicest guy, like absolutely the nicest guy. And got some pictures with him that exist in this room, and they're not really allowed out into the world. Jeff's a pretty private guy.
Yeah.
So kind of got a picture in the studio of the team over there. But and then funny enough, I saw him. I was producing an artist that actually Terry Brown, who I mentioned before, was managing as well, named Jesse LaBelle. Yeah. And Jeff was in town again, playing in another arena here. And I got tickets. I got 2 tickets, and I took Jesse with me, and we went backstage for like the meet and greet afterward. And a lot of people went up and met Jeff. I was like, I'll wait till the end. And Jeff sees me in the group of people, and he starts singing "Merry Christmas, Baby." And he's like, you're the engineer. You're Ryan, aren't you? You're on "Merry Christmas, Baby." I was like, yeah, that was me. And everyone's looking at me like, who is this guy? And it was very funny. He remembered me. He was super cool. It was like, I got to talk to him for probably about 5 minutes. There are a lot of people that paid for the meet and greet. I didn't pay for the meet and greet. I got, passes from his management. But, that was a really neat experience on that record, being able to do that kind of stuff. It was also the record that I had worked on, the first record I worked on with Bob from top to bottom. And so going through that process was, anytime you can work with someone who's a true master at their craft, you're never going to lose.
Yeah.
One of those, just don't screw it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't, that's where, the learning to be all the stuff you learned to be as an intern years ago kind of starts to kick in again, just, you do your thing, and some really cool stuff happened on that album. It was a fun project to do. It was really intense. It was really laborious, but it was a blast to do.
Absolutely incredible. For those that have just tuned in and are at this point in the interview, we're just talking about Jeff Beck as well, that Ryan's worked with. Absolutely incredible. Because I had a similar-ish story with when we interviewed Tim Palmer a few months ago, and he was at some awards and he saw Ozzy, and he kind of thought, oh, is Ozzy going to remember me? Yeah. And then Ozzy did remember him. So it's so nice, like, how, for example, that Jeff remembered you as well, that, because at the end of the day, without mix engineers and producers, the artists, they wouldn't be where they are today. So it's just so nice that, that you get remembered. That's so awesome. Also, obviously where you are geographically, so in Nashville. So I've talked to some incredible engineers over the last few months based out in Nashville, like David Kalmusky as well, and yourself, and a couple of others. So tell us more about Nashville and the community and why so many people are so attracted to move to Nashville and do music. Well, what is it that makes it so special, do you feel?
I think there's a lot of reasons. Honestly, there is the music community here is pretty small. And even if you don't know everybody, you still kind of feel like you're part of the same tapestry, if you will. Yeah. And so that has a lot of benefits in terms of generally you can at least make contact with almost anyone in the industry, and you're only like once removed from it. You know, you'll meet someone, oh yeah, I know this person, I know that person, and you know, I'll pass, you know, I'll give you their info or whatever. That's really cool. It also means that you have to be a little bit more careful with making mistakes and screwing up. Not like in a I screwed up in the studio kind of way, I made a mistake kind of way, but like personally, you know, or even professionally, because it's not like LA or New York where there's so many people where you can just kind of find a different crew. You know, if you screwed up in one crew, you can kind of like, oh, okay, I'll find another one. Nashville, it's very difficult to do that because it's small, and you know, for all intents and purposes, everyone kind of knows everybody, and so you know, it has its advantage for sure, but you know, it has that aspect to it as well. The other thing about Nashville is the talent, the sheer amount of talent here, like you could call it talent per capita, for the amount of people that live here and the amount of talent that is here is insane. Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And Bob said something to me years ago. He said, talent is nothing special in Nashville because everybody's talented. So going back to something you said earlier, setting yourself apart, you know, like for an artist or whatever, yep, your talent alone isn't going to set you apart. There's got to be some other thing that is, if it's a certain character in your voice or the way that you write songs or whatever it is, that'll be the thing that makes you stand out. And that's not to disparage upon the people who are talented. I'm not saying it's not a valuable thing. Obviously it is. But if you're in like a small town and you're one person that's got an incredible voice, everyone's going to know who you are. Everyone's going to know that you're this, you know, really awesome talent. Here, because talent is everywhere, you're now a really tiny fish in a really, really big talent pond. Yeah. And so it still winds up being, you know, finding out, you know, what differentiates you. A lot of it that's great about Nashville is it's a pretty chill community here for the most part. A lot of people go back a lot of years, and you know, especially in the studio world, they go back years together, decades playing on records together, and all of that. The songwriters here is the exact same thing. And this is, you know, this is the one town that's really a songwriter town. It's not necessary. It's, you know, it's not a pop town. Not that there's not great pop music here, but it's a songwriter town. It's the only town that I can think of where the songwriting industry is as powerful as it is, and as much of a force as it is. And writers that have made the amount of writers that have made great livings being writers is pretty incredible. I mean, at a pragmatic level, Nashville's less expensive than LA or New York, or even probably London, you know, for that matter. I'm not saying it's the cheapest, but it's certainly not, you know, California and, you know, where I'm from. And I mean, the house that I live in here is kind of a, you know, it's a nice home. It's an average home here in town, but you plop that thing. I grew up in a town called Santa Barbara. You plop that my house in Santa Barbara, there's no way that's going to happen, that I'm going to be able to afford that. But so there's that aspect to it. And there's also a big diversity in music here as well. anything from Christian music and gospel-oriented music, to which is one of the big industries here in town, along with the country industry. But this town has an incredible rock scene as well.
Yeah.
And that scene is starting to grow, where you've got bands like, especially someone like Kings of Leon. They're from like 20 minutes north of Nashville. I think they're from a town called Hendersonville. And there was always this kind of like, yes, there's a lot of rock here, but the rock industry wasn't here. That was still in LA, predominantly in LA and some in New York. But that's beginning to move here as well. And because people just like living here, as opposed to, the incredible sprawling nature of LA, and it takes you forever to get anywhere because there's always traffic, or the complete opposite, which is insane density of New York or northern New Jersey. And so here is kind of the best of both worlds. And from a travel standpoint, you can get basically anywhere in the country in about 4 hours on plane. And if you drive, I think it's within 8 hours of it's like 8 or 10 hours of Nashville. If you drive in any direction, I think you've hit 2/3 of the entire population. It's something insane like that.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's a very easy place to get to New York, to get to LA, to get to Chicago, to get to Miami. Like, you can kind of get everywhere from here because you're not so far on one side or the other.
That's mad. That's absolutely crazy. I'm a big Korn fan, and I was quite amazed to find that Korn, I think it was Brian Welsh, and it's like based in Nashville, and a few of the other guys, I think they recorded a project, but I've, again, like you said, I've heard of like rock bands coming over to, a lot of rock bands come over to record in Nashville, and metal bands as well, because I suppose, like you said, when you think of Nashville, you think of the contemporary Christian market, you think of the country market and all that sort of stuff. But it is really interesting that scene is starting to flourish over your way as well. And over in Manchester where we are, we've got such a rich history as well, with like kind of Joy Division and Oasis. It's absolutely crazy. But I think that I was talking to, I think it was Mark Dodson, one of our guests, a few months ago about this, and he's saying that kind of we need more bands over Manchester way again, to really kind of, hit culture like it did back then. Because I don't think these bands seem to be in the UK kind of seem to be attracting as much attention as what they used to. So it'll be really interesting just to kind of see what bands kind of come out of the UK again. So I know that over here, a lot of it's mainly kind of this music in the charts. I know it's probably similar in the States, but it's like hip hop has just taken over from rock music altogether, which I love a lot of hip hop stuff, but it's like kind of rock doesn't seem to be as popular as what it once was. So I wonder if there'll be a bit more of a shift, if there's going to be more rock music that's going to start coming back into the mainstream, because I've noticed that, well, I'm sure you have as well, I noticed over the years that it's almost like, I know when, I think it was The Weeknd that came out recently, and it's like, oh, so we're kind of reliving the 80s all over again. And it's kind of that sound. But then I started listening to the radio, and I'm there going, oh, there's all these like guitars all of a sudden that are starting to get played on the radio. And it's almost like the 90s is starting to come back. So do you feel that there's going to be any new genres that are going to come out? Do you reckon music, is just going to keep regurgitating, or do you reckon there will be new genres that will come out of nowhere like it used to?
It's tough. I think music has a certain cyclical nature where, there's always the expression rock comes around every 10 years, kind of thing. And, rock, I think, struggles or had struggled against hip hop and against pop. Especially when streaming came in. Oftentimes, if you look at like statistics, genre statistics for physical sales, CDs, or not even CDs, but in particular like vinyl, rock music tends to dominate all of those. And so I think that's one thing, is that the younger audience is so into streaming now, and music is becoming less about the main event and more about it's something kind of happening off in the background. Yeah. You know, it's, I've got music while I'm jogging. I've got music while I'm cleaning the house. I've got music while I'm, you know, whatever. And it's not the thing. You know, TV is, you know, you sit in front of the TV or whatever, but, and it used to be that way with music. You had the old console record players, and you would sit at the record player and you'd listen to it. We have one in our living room that belonged to my wife's grandmother. Yeah. And it's awesome. It's an old Silvertone, and, you know, it's a big honking thing. And so, but I think part of, I don't know, I love so much rock, but there didn't seem to be a cohesive movement of rock. There was kind of like a lot of like Americana rock, you know, stuff that's more like Kings of Leon, you know, kind of thing, or indie rock that came out, you know, even Cage the Elephant, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah. There wasn't like a movement of something. So like in the early 2000s, you had bands like, I mean, no particular order. You had bands like Creed, you had bands like Stained, you had a lot of bands that were kind of a similar type of sound that kind of came out at the same time and created a rock movement, whether you like that movement or not. But that seemed to be the last time, late 90s, early 2000s, that really happened. And then you go back, you know, 10 years prior to that, you've got grunge. And that was kind of a unified thing that went out into the world. Before that, it was hair metal and, you know, that kind of stuff. Before that, it was the 70s rock, you know, kind of stuff. Anything from the Eagles to Boston to Kansas to any of that kind of thing. But there was always kind of a unified thing. I just don't know that I see that as much. And I don't know, there's a lot of metal that's out there, but it doesn't really seem to make many waves in what it's doing. And I see it a lot in, you know, a lot of people in like online forums or whatever. They're big metal guys and women. And it just doesn't seem to be catching on. You know, because I think in the end, a lot of what people want, it's the reason that I loved my favorite Metallica records were the ones that Bob Rock did. Yeah. Because there were records where I could find a melody somewhat, and I could find a groove. I mean, my favorite rock band is probably Guns N' Roses, because there was always a great melody. And absolutely. You know, and it was performed to the hilt. And metal stuff and the really, really heavy stuff I never got into, because I was never into speed metal, which is why I didn't like the early Metallica stuff, you know, that was, you know, on the kick drums and that kind of stuff. And, you know, and there's a lot of that, you know, stuff that's back today. And to me, if I can't sing it, or if I can't hum along to it, or find something to really gravitate towards, I'm not an angry enough person that, you know, I don't like listening to screaming, you know. Yeah. I've got school age kids. I hear enough screaming as it is, you know, with them. But no, I hope that rock makes a comeback, because you know, as much as I love the technology, as much as I love being able to utilize all of it, I think that there is still some magic in having people in a room playing something. Yeah, absolutely agree with you as well. So important that kind of getting people together in a room as well. But I suppose with technology now as well, the fact that people can now, I'm sure you do it with some of your artists that you work with, is the fact that you can now remotely chat to people, and you can remotely mix and talk to each other like we're doing now via video chat, and you can mix live
for the client, or produce live or record live as well. It's just absolutely crazy with technology what can be done. So interesting as well. So we're not really touched on it, but in your studio, just for the gearheads, is there any particular speakers that you enjoy using? What's your setup, and do you use any headphones as well when you're working on your projects as well?
I mean, if I'm tracking, I use headphones, but
yeah,
but if I can listen to speakers, I prefer speakers. So if I'm tracking, I have a pair of Westlake Audio BBSM 6s from the 80s, very low serial number. I think they're numbers 5 and 6.
Yep.
And so those are my main tracking speakers. And then for mixing, I have a pair of NS10s. And then as auxiliary speakers, I have these little Sony, they're kind of crappy sounding, but I don't know, little Sony speakers, I think from the 80s, that sound like they were pulled out of a really small, like, boombox. And then I have a pair of Oratones also that I'll sometimes bring out. But that's the speaker setup. A lot of people don't like NS10s. I happen to actually really like NS10s. And I also have a sub. That's part of what helps me with the NS10s. I have the Infinity, what is that thing? A BU2, something like that. And that helps me get, the bottom end. But I just know if I really want to, get off on what I'm hearing, I've got a Sonos system in my living room. I'll go listen to that.
Yeah.
But for work purposes, it's really strange if I'm listening on speakers that are full fidelity speakers, something like the ATCs or the Barefoots to a degree, or, like big Gentle X, or, whatever. I tend to not be able to mix as well. I don't know why.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I know NS10's like the back of my hand. So that's all. There's a certain comfort with that, and I know what they do. I know, how I don't mix loud. I rarely even ever listen loud, and so they're great for that because they don't get particularly loud. But that's the speaker setup.
Amazing. Thanks so much. That's absolutely brilliant. What about as well when you're so obviously with all the different instruments that you've got, if you're recording guitars, do you tend to use real amps, or do you tend to use plugins, or is it a camper that you tend to approach your guitars with?
All of it.
Yeah.
It really depends on what I'm going for. If I'm going for something a little more mainline, I'll use an amp. If I'm going for something a little wackier, I'll go in the box. And there are, there's anything from guitar rig, the Native Instruments guitar rig. I've done that to, I have the, it's made by STL Tones.
Tone Hub.
Tone Hub.
Yeah,
Tone Hub. That's a really cool one. And it just depends on what the circumstance is. Artists will bring in amps. In there I've got an orange, I've got a matchless, and I've got an ISO booth over here. An orange matchless, and I think there's an old, it's an old crate.
Right. Okay.
That there was this one amp that they made. A buddy of mine is in international sales for Gibson Custom Shop here in town, and he turned me on to them. And it's this like little single 10-inch speaker.
Yeah.
That is all hand wired, point to point, Class A. The whole whatever bit tube amp, but it's great. And so they actually did a smart thing and didn't put their name on the front. It's just like a V, and like that's all that's on the front of it. And so that's a fun little amp. It doesn't get used a ton, but it gets used some. And then if I'm working with artists that bring in amps, I did a rock project a while back, and the artist, is a guitar player too, and he has a Marshall Silver Jubilee that we use.
Nice.
And
Great.
so we use that, and
yeah.
But yeah, it was, I'm not a purist in that way. It doesn't have to be a real amp. It doesn't have to be a plugin. If as long as it gets me to the goal, I rarely care how I get there.
Amazing. And the more
live stuff, I have the little Helix, the Line 6, not the big one, but I have, I think it's called the Stomp.
Yeah.
Three buttons on it. I have that one. I'm actually playing a show tonight with an artist I produce, and here in town, and I just take that thing. I've got in-ears. I take that thing. There's no stage volume. I've got it dialed in really, really well, and all the sound people love it because they don't have a Fender blasting them, from the stage coming at them.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that. I'm guessing that, do you download any third-party impulse responses on your Helix as well? Do you put them on there, or is it pretty much all stock stuff?
I mean, I like the own hammer stuff.
Yeah.
So the primary one is one of the I don't remember which one it is, but it's the own hammer Friedman stuff. I have that, and I think I pretty much just use the Friedman on everything. It just sounds great. It sounds like an amp coming back at me, and it responds like that too.
Yeah.
So
amazing. As one guitarist to another, I've got to ask you, what's your favorite go-to guitar? I know it's like choosing a favorite child, but is there any particular guitar that's your favorite go-to to use when you're producing or live?
I kind of go in phases. And some of it is application specific. So it's really dependent on the job that I have to do. But right now, man, I like, I have it's a Telecaster that is the Chris Shiflett model, signature model.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Fighters.
Yeah.
And so I have that. That's a fun guitar because that's almost like a combination Telecaster and Les Paul.
Yeah.
And so that's the one I'm going to play tonight. So I like that one. But I have a custom shop Strat that I like for a lot of stuff. I have a Les Paul. I also play bass, and so I've got a P bass. I think they call it a P bass special. It's like the P bass with the J bass pickup at the back of it as well. Amazing. It depends on what the job is that I need to do.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ryan. That's absolutely brilliant. So a couple of last quick questions before you go today. So I know, again, it's quite a hard question. I'm guessing, like most engineers and producers, you've probably got 1,000 plugins in your arsenal, but is there any particular standout plugins that you enjoy using currently?
I would say, again, it goes back to what am I doing? I like one of the things that I've been using a lot lately is I have a Slate ML1 microphone, and I have the ML2 as well. And so I've been using that a lot lately, and that's cool. So it has all the plug-in VMR that it comes with. And so that's great for tracking. I actually set up a buddy of mine at his house a couple of months ago with all of the Slate mics on his drum kit. And all he does is in the box modeling with the plugins when he sends his drums to clients. And so I set him up basically with like he's got, $150,000 worth of gear in this thing. And he said, I keep getting responses back like, I didn't know you had all this equipment. And literally he has like an interface and the Slate mics and Logic, and that's it.
Wow.
But it's a kind of a testament to, as long as you get the job done, doesn't really matter how we got there. In some ways. So that's cool for tracking. I've used that on guitars and acoustics and stuff like that. But for creative kind of wacky stuff, I really like the Sound Toys plugins. Those are a lot of fun. Even some of the wave stuff that's more creativity driven, like the Meta Filter and I think it's called Berserk or whatever that distortion plugin is. But I really like the Sound Toy stuff for that. Mixing, I like the CLA Mix Hub, the new, basically kind of the new SSL plugin that they did. I really like that, as well as the Plugin Alliance SSL. Good one as well too. It's just what gets the job done. I mixed some stuff with Bob in summer of, I guess it would have been summer of 19, that was unreleased Four Seasons songs that were being put out, that are going to be put out, I think, later this year on a big box set thing. And I only used Slate on those mixes, and it was only the Neve EQs. They're all tape transfers. So back then, they did even more committing back then. And so it was a lot of just get a basic EQ, which I actually used very little EQ on those mixes. I think there were like 15 songs. And mainly just got into, dialing in the appropriate effects, reverbs and all that kind of stuff to make it period specific, because it didn't need to sound like a modern record. It had to sound like something that was still done back in the early 70s, I think, is when those were recorded. It winds up being, what's the job, and what are the tools that I have at hand. I use outboard gear for a lot of the effects. I've got the AMS reverb, the RMX 16, the old non-lin thing. I've got its partner, which is the delay, the DMX 15. That's my main delay. Crazy good. I've got 3 Yamaha SPX 90s. And those have a really good, I use one of them for the symphonic preset, but it also has a really cool Rev 1 reverb setting that's a lot of fun. And then I have one that's just kind of for miscellaneous stuff. 160s, distressors. I've got some interesting compressors. They were old broadcast compressors made by a company called Innovonics. They're the Innovonics 201s. I've got 4 original Trident A-range channel strips from a console, I guess in the late 70s. And, but I can use it. I could not use it and be just as fine. Just as good. And as long as I know what I'm after, I just tweak until I get it. My gear out here, other than the delay time on the DMX 15, I don't touch my gear. I just turn it on, and it's already in my template. It's already ready to go. And like compressors, they're set it and forget it. So all the gain staging for that happens in Pro Tools. And because I don't like recalling gear. That was the biggest nightmare with consoles, is recalling the console. So if I don't have to recall any of my gear other than a delay time, that's super easy for me. And,
happy days.
And much more preferable.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that. That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks for the insight, Ryan. As well, so quick question as well. If a client sends across a mix that is recorded maybe at home in the home studio that's quite digital, how might you approach that mix to kind of bring it a bit more to life? So would you maybe approach it with saturation? Is that maybe like one of the ways that you might approach that to kind of give it a little bit more analog flavor? Or how would you try and gel that together to kind of make it, sound more, not polished maybe, but sound like a cohesive piece?
I'd say saturation is one that can be done. I don't use, my mixes are super saturated, but not where they sound like it. Every channel has saturation on it, and my tube bus has a lot of saturation on it. I can mix very, very loud, but I do not use a brick wall limiter.
Right.
Just because of the way that I use the saturation.
Yeah.
That said, saturation would be one. I think even more than that, I think having confidence in your balance is a big one, because oftentimes if a mix sounds a little bit disjointed, it's because a balance is off.
Yeah.
And you can have stuff that's too loud that's kind of cool sounding. That was a big thing in the 60s. Like, Bob said that, I asked him one time, I was like, man, your early stuff, that tambourine is loud. Why is it so loud? And he said, well, what song was it? And I told him what it was. He said, oh, that was because the producer played it, and he wanted it to be super loud. But it was a thing. It was a sound. You might have a kick drum that you feel is too loud, but it was part of the identity of your record. A classic example is the cowbell on Don't Fear the Reaper. That thing is cooking throughout that whole song. But, so you can have stuff that's too loud that is, still kind of creates the identity for something. Confidence in your balance, making sure everything is kind of parked where it needs to be. I find that mixes that sound sterile are either way too dry or way too wet.
Right.
And I generally find that in terms of the ambiances, a lot of that has to do with the listening environment.
Yeah.
Or I'll hear something and I'm like, man, they have either no subwoofer and there's way too much low end, or their subwoofer is cranked and maybe they have a node, like a room node, and there's no low end, in the song, like that kind of stuff. So, it could be a number of things, but, saturation is a really great glue. But like anything, you actually need to know what you're doing with it. Like, why are you making that move? Why are you choosing that sound? Why are you choosing that EQ frequency? Why are you doing that stuff? Knowing why you're doing it is super, super important. You have to know why you're doing that stuff, because if you don't, you're kind of floundering. And if you're floundering, you're not being creative. You're not in it. You're constantly second guessing. And I'm not saying even now, that with all the experiences that I've had and the amount of music I've worked on, there are times where I have mixed and I am almost done. And I'm like, man. And I will literally go through the entire session and zero out the entire thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I won't even save it. I'm like, it's not there. And I'll give it a day, or I'll give it a half a day, and I'll come back to it. And I might even do the same stuff, a lot of the same stuff, but something else happens that gets me to where I need to be. So, revisiting stuff is part of the process. Don't think that you have to get it right away. The first mix out, that there's never going to be revisions. All the greats get revision notes back, and it's the nature of what it is. There's always tweaks.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you did a bad job. It just means that there's an element that's not quite, or elements or whatever, that's not quite right.
So good. Thanks so much for that insight. It's absolutely brilliant, Ryan. So really quick before you go, what's next on your journey? And obviously I know when we talk to a lot of producers and engineers like yourself, obviously kind of you've got lots of NDA contracts and things that you can't really discuss, but is there, so what's next on your journey, and is there any projects that you can talk about that are coming up very shortly in your repertoire?
So, I'm working on some things with Bob, some I can't talk about, but one I can talk about is he's developed, one of the artists that, excuse me, he went on to produce was Neil Diamond.
Wow.
And so he is developing, co-producing a musical about Neil's life. And they brought in, this is all public information that you can find on the internet, but they brought in some of the biggest out there. The guy that is writing the book, he wrote The Theory of Everything, which was the Stephen Hawking movie. He wrote The Darkest Hour, which was the Churchill movie with Gary Oldman. And Amazing. He also wrote Bohemian Rhapsody. And so he's doing the book. The director, Michael, Tony winner, he did American Idiot, and he's awesome. He's a big trip. So that is, we had started working on that prior to COVID, and that's now picking back up again this fall, just in the development process of that. And my involvement with that project is, Neil's catalog. It's not like new songs have to be written. Neil's catalog is already out there. So, okay, they're going through what songs do we use, what songs do we not use, and how do we adapt them to the stage. So it's rearrangements and experiments and all that kind of stuff. So I do the engineering on that stuff. So that one's a lot of fun. I'm working with Bob a couple of times a week, and it's always fun. And I'm actually, when they get back, whenever my country will let travelers from your country in, a group called Essex County, and they are actually from Essex County.
Okay.
And they're three brothers trio, and they have that family harmony thing that's just so good. But they're all incredible musicians, and they're a blast. They have some powerhouse management here in town, and I've done some live stuff with them. So I'll be in the studio with them hopefully this fall. If Delta variant can calm itself down and get out of the way. And then I've got I do a lot of, one of the things that I'm really passionate about that I've been doing the past couple of years in a big way is sync music. And I've written some jingles for co-written, I should say, for some fairly big corporations here in town, or in the States. Anyone from Target to Nike to Crystal Burger to it just kind of goes on and on and on. Academy Sport is a big sports retailer here, and so that's been a lot of fun. And so I've been doing a lot of writing and producing on that kind of stuff for a while, and a couple of partners of mine in that, we've just been doing a ton of writing, ton of production, and specifically for sync. So that's been a big push that I'm doing. Other than that, helping coach my kids' football team.
Amazing.
Baseball or golf or whatever. So, but that's right now, that's what's on the docket. And Jesse LaBelle is another artist I work with quite a bit, whether it's mixing or playing live or producing. And a couple of years ago, we got to do something cool with Jesse. We actually opened up for Garth Brooks. And
wow.
And we actually did that in Canada. And that show was huge. I mean, I think it was the smallest stadium on the tour, but it was still 47,000 people. And so that was wild. That was a lot of fun. And Jesse's a great guy. Working with an rock artist here in town coming up named Ryan Sutton. So that's kind of what's on the docket next for me.
Amazing. That's so cool. So many things going on. Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. Massively appreciate it. It's been so interesting and exciting just chatting about your journey. You work with Bob and how you've come up as well. Really quick before you go, we've had a message through from Casey on YouTube. Casey was asking, how quickly do you accomplish a mix typically? I know that's probably like asking how long's a piece of string, but is there any particular time frame?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I break a mix apart into 2 phases. I do mix prep, which is cleaning up the session and making sure all the files line up, making sure everything is there. And I'll go through and do a lot of what I would have an assistant do, which is, if there's any edits that need to be cleaned up, cleaning that up. I'll go through and print. If I am gonna use drum samples, I'll go through and print them. I'll make the decision and I'll print them. I do not have trigger open in my mix sessions at all. And so I'll do stuff like that. I'm also big on comping. So if I have, like, say 16 tracks of a gang vocal that's all doing the same thing, I'll print that down to 2 channels. There is no reason to mess with 16 channels of a gang vocal that happens for 20 seconds at the end of a song. Like, there's no reason. Or if there are the same harmony parts, but they're stacked, I'll print those down to 2. Stuff like that. If there's a lead vocal that's on the verse vocal and the pre-chorus vocal and the chorus vocal and the bridge vocal, bring them all up on 1. And I don't need to split that out, for that. I do the same thing with drums. Like, if there's multiple mics on a snare drum, I'll print those down to a single one. I'll find a blend of the 2 mics that I like, and I'll commit that. Multiple room mics get comped down, because, and I will answer the question, because when I sit down to mix, I don't want to think. I just want to go. So my template is there, it's ready to go. Everything is routed. I never, unless I make a last minute creative decision during the mix, I never go in and route something to a new effect. Everything is routed and ready to go. And all I got to do is turn it on. It's already got the level turned up on it, basically, to where I always have a starting place. So if I do that, depending on what the song is, I've done mixes in an hour and a half, not including the prep work. Then there's other mixes that might be 5-6 hours. And that's not to say that speed is the most important thing. If I know an engineer like Chris Lord-Alge is big on speed. That he'll mix fast, and that's great for him. There's an engineer like Craig Bauer who likes to take his time on a mix, and it might take a couple of days. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing right or wrong about both of them. They're both incredible mixers, and they both get the job done. And so that just happens to be where I land in terms of the mixes that I do. And I mix till I'm done. So, did I lose you? Rich? I see a picture of a cat, and it says it's looking for the phone. Let's see if I can shoot you a text. Did I lose you? Rich. I guess I lost you. If you can hear me, I shot you a message on Facebook. Well, sorry for anyone, if you guys can still hear this. Oh, texting me back. Let's see what he says. Jumping back in. Okay, it says he's jumping back in. See what he says. You there? Well, let's see here. Oh, 1 second. Hopefully we didn't lose everybody.
Apologies,
There you are.
I'm back.
You're back.
All good to go. Yeah, sorry about that. So we just
Okay.
had a slight internet glitch. So apologies. But
All
no,
good.
that's so awesome, though. Thanks so much, though, for your time today, Ryan. It's been absolutely phenomenal.
My pleasure.
Just finding out about however you tick and as well, and all the insight that you've given us today as well. But yeah, it's been absolutely awesome. So I just want to say as well, thank you so much for everyone that's joined us today as well. It's been so much fun chatting away with Ryan as well. Ryan, is there a website that people can check out to check out your work?
They can find me at Instagram and Facebook. I'm on both those platforms. I think Instagram is rsutton81, and Facebook you can just find my name. I'm actually one of my production partners and I are about to launch a whole new web site thing for all of this sync stuff, and a lot of that sync stuff is going to encompass our individual work as well as to what we've both done, because he does a ton of video work as well. So but that's coming. But you know, social media is the best place to find me, and I'm always up for what it's worth. I'm always up to answer questions if people have them and want to, you know, find out more. I'm kind of an open book. I don't really have any secret techniques or you know super closely guarded secrets. So
amazing, so good. Now, thanks so much though for your time today, Ryan. Do feel free to. Thanks so much, man. So feel free to hang out once we end the live as well, which I'll end in a second.
Okay.
Thanks again to everyone that's joined as well. It's been absolutely phenomenal. So again, feel free to join the community, which Ryan's on as well, which is facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. And our YouTube channel, as well as youtube.com/produce, mix, fix, and conquer, where we all help and support each other any way that we can. And as phenomenal professionals like Ryan on the community as well, like Ryan said, to help you out with your mixes and producing and recording and things like that as well. So it's brilliant. But Ryan, thanks again for your time today, man. It's been brilliant.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.